Philanthropology and the Good Road is brought to you by AMD, Advanced Micro Devices.
The leafy Minneapolis suburb that lion-killing dentist Walter Palmer calls home. A lot of animal lovers and not much sympathy for their now notorious neighbour.
I think it's somewhat egregious, almost what I would characterize as criminal, that someone would find it enjoyable to shoot such a beautiful creature just so they can say they have a trophy.
Wow, that's pretty heavy.
People love animals.
I know it's a very touchy issue, and I don't know, Earl, would you want to live next to the guy who's shooting all those animals?
Well, this episode is going to challenge whatever your views are on this topic.
So yeah, I think it's going to be a good one. One of our best.
Well, let's get into it.
Philanthropology is the companion piece to our TV show on public television called The Good Road.
I'm Earl Bridges.
And I'm Craig Martin, and we capture stories of mercenaries, missionaries, and misfits.
It's a raw look at the messy and complicated business of global philanthropy, and Craig and I set off around the world to places where people are doing good.
It's Batman, not Superman. Check out The Good Road on your local PBS station starting in April.
So, brother, do you eat meat?
Do I eat meat?
Do
yes,
you eat meat?
I am not a vegetarian.
What's the strangest meat you've ever eaten?
Probably in a place called Sierra Leone in West Africa, I had monkey, which was very, very odd.
Well, yes. I didn't expect monkey.
It was not great.
Under what circumstances would any human being eat a monkey?
I know. I feel badly about it now. But so the missionaries that I was doing some filming with lived in a really remote part of Sierra Leone, and for whatever reason, there weren't other sources of protein, and that was the village kids would come around with these big monkeys and sell them.
Yeah, I kind of want to believe you. I'm not sure I do. Well, in this episode, we're going to go delve into the messy ethics of poaching, trophy hunting, killing for food, wildlife management, which, again, spoiler alert, largely deals with killing animals as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to hit a lot of different things, but this is going to be an interesting, messy.
Yeah, and like all of these, it's messy, like you said.
Exactly. Because in this episode, we're going to look at the issue from basically 4 points of view. We're going to have a Texas gentleman who's a trophy hunter out there. We're going to get a Harvard primatologist. We'll get a Kenyan wildlife ranger. And we're going to have two knuckleheads who grew up in Bangkok, Thailand. And let's just refer to us as Epicureans.
This sounds like the setup for a really bad joke.
It's going to be a bad joke. At the beginning of each new year, we all think about the goals we have for ourselves. One of my goals this year is to learn and expand my knowledge of our world and the people in it.
I'm with you, Earl. And fortunately, we can accomplish that goal through a fantastic resource, the Great Courses Plus.
It's an online learning service which offers thousands of lectures from top experts covering everything from human behavior to American history, from travel photography to cooking, and the list goes on.
Yeah, and so one course that Earl and I definitely recommend is Understanding the Mysteries of Human Behavior. This course asks thought-provoking questions about the contradictions of human behavior, analyzes current theories in psychology, neuroscience, and other behavioral sciences.
They're offering our listeners an amazing deal. 3 months of unlimited access for just $30. That's only $10 a month.
Get all the details at thegreatcoursesplus.com/thegoodroad.
thegreatcoursesplus.com/thegoodroad. We were introduced to our first guest after seeing a documentary on CNN called Trophy.
Yeah, it actually won an Emmy for Outstanding Nature Documentary last September, I believe.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, and Philip Glass was an individual that was highlighted in this show who was a trophy hunter who owns property out in West Texas. And he let people into his world, which, again, it's an area I had no idea really existed.
I'm Philip Glass. I'm the owner of Half Circle 6 Ranches, and we are near Water Valley, Texas. I have several ranches, and we raise Dorper sheep, which is interesting because that's another one of my African connections. I raise Dorper sheep, which is a breed from South Africa, and I also raise cattle, and I raise deer and other exotic animal species, antelope from Africa, and that sort of thing.
Now, I like Philip as a person. He was easy to like. Great family guy. He's a good old boy from Texas. But when you take a look at his and other exotic game hunting websites in Texas and elsewhere, I got to tell you, it's like seeing something that you never wanted to see for the first time. It is hard to take in.
Yeah, I'm sure.
In this interview, Philip started discussing his background in the business. And believe me, this is big business.
It is a remarkable situation we have in Texas. I've served on the board of directors for the Exotic Wildlife Association and been a member for many years. And we have an interesting industry here. And it's a very powerful industry, and it's based on freedom. There are absolutely no regulations to raising these foreign animals. And consequently, we have huge numbers of them. We have a huge industry, and we have many, many animals that are extinct in their native countries. I personally own animals that are declared extinct in Africa where they come from, yet we have thousands upon thousands, in some cases tens of thousands of these animals.
So dude, he has extinct animals on his property.
It shocked me, but he has animals which are extinct in their native countries. It really smacks of a Jurassic Park of these crazy animals that sometimes only exist in a ranch in West Texas.
There is a breeding side to it and a hunting side. Those don't always coexist. At times they do, and at times they don't. In other words, there are people who just enjoy raising these animals that are not actually in the hunting business. However, the animal's value is still based on hunting as the baseline value of that animal. But they're incredibly valuable. There's an incredible numbers of people raising them in Texas and from all walks of life, as you mentioned. The exotic industry began in Texas in the 1930s with some animals that came out of zoos, some African and Indian antelope and deer species that came out of zoos and found the Texas Hill Country to be a suitable habitat, and they did well. They lived, they grew, they had babies, they did very well. So the exotic industry in Texas is very old.
Did you know that this existed? I mean, y'all Baylor boys, y'all never got liquored up, went out black wildebeest tipping?
Not that I can recall, but again, it might have been the liquor I was drinking. But I do know plenty of people who grew up hunting.
We both do, and this is very much Philip's stories as well. This has been part of his family tradition for a very long time.
People ask me that all the time, especially with my involvement in this film or when I started hunting. And groups of hunters sit around and ask one another, when did you start hunting? Well, I don't have that answer. Hunting's part of my culture. It wasn't a choice. I didn't start hunting. I was born hunting. I've hunted since I was a little child. And of course, having 3 older brothers that I looked up to that all hunted, that probably was a big influence. But I never had the day when I made the conscious decision to go hunting. We've been here since the 1880s. My great-grandfather came here from North Carolina in the 1880s and started a ranching operation with cattle and eventually sheep. And my family's been here ever since. So we have a long tradition of living out here, raising animals, and of course hunting as well. And hunting is just part of our family tradition and culture. And it's a big part of what we do.
So hunting is not only his family tradition, in reality, it's everyone's family tradition. Mankind has been hunting and killing and eating animals for our whole existence. But what happens to the meat of an exotic animal that gets killed?
It is the number one question I get when I speak at these different events. The number one question is, where does the meat go? And whether you're here in Texas with a deer, which we enjoy venison, we actually do a lot of deer harvesting due to our management scheme, so we can't eat it all. So we give some away to needy people or to our local food bank. And then you take the story of traveling overseas, and you're oftentimes in places where people are very protein deficient. And so it's almost a silly question to ask what happens to the meat overseas, because the meat is a treasured thing amongst a group of people who eat cornmeal every day. That protein is very well received and a real joy for us as hunters to get to see that meat used and distributed by needy people.
Yeah, well, if God didn't want us to eat meat, he wouldn't have made it so damn delicious.
And I totally understand the meat is food argument. But hunting exotic animals, it's not about satisfying your craving for a Thompson Gazelle burger with a side of dick.
So, I mean, it's true. But, for me, I've been out and seen a lot of these animals out in the wild and filmed them and stuff. And you don't have to kill these big, beautiful, majestic animals for food.
Right. Even if they have an interesting kind of hide pattern and impressive horns,
Yeah.
But again, there's also the argument of hunting is a sport.
It's complicated to get some of these places. Some of these places will have to plan to hire a charter plane to get us there because the areas are so remote. But planning and preparing yourself is a big part of it. So physical training, that's a big part of it. There's some training with shooting. For me personally, I've been to a safari shooting school down in the Texas Hill Country. That's a wonderful experience that truly prepares a person, because you are going into a dangerous situation and you have the responsibility to be as prepared physically, mentally, and with your shooting skills as you can possibly be. And a person like me is not going to take that lightly. I'm going to be prepared.
This hunting argument, for me, is really only limited to certain animals, like not adorable hedgehogs and koala bears or my golden retriever or my daughter's horse.
Some people think that all animals are pets, and that's really a silly, misinformed way to go through life, and certainly no way to manage wildlife, to treat them as pets, to treat them as individuals. I have pets. I have many pets, and I love my pets. And that's a different experience there with the animals, having a pet versus managing wildlife or managing livestock. And we have livestock that we get attached to. The funny saying is you don't want to eat anything that's had a name. If you have a lamb that you've raised and the kids have gotten to know, that's a little difficult. And I understand that. And I'm sensitive to people's feelings about animals. But the point is, I have a different relationship with animals than the average person. I live with the animals. I raise them, I care for them, and of course I also hunt them. So I'm just a part of the animal's world in a way that is very different than the average person.
So I get it. Some animals are pets, or they're too adorable to harvest for good. But most of this is not in dispute. You don't have large membership organizations who are fighting for the right to breed, raise, and hunt poodles or koala bears.
Right. On the other hand, you do have people that are advocating for trophy hunts. I mean, they're fighting for their rights to kill an elephant, lion, cheetah, or any of those other animals that we saw on those. So that's where I think you pivot towards this economic argument. And quite frankly, that seems to be a stronger argument. And that really converges with the economics of wildlife management and this kind of conservation argument for trophy hunting.
I like to tell people a story about the statistics about just right here at home. In North America in 1900, we estimated we had 500,000 white-tailed deer in all of North America. Now we harvest 500,000 just in Texas. The white-tailed deer success story is one that kind of gets forgotten because they're so common. But we can't forget that, a century ago, we had some problems with wildlife here in this country. And hunters stepped up. We put in the Pittman-Robertson Act where we taxed ourselves. We took that money and now we fund somewhere between 60 and 80% of these wildlife agencies here in the United States with this money. And the success stories are wonderful that we've achieved here in North America. And now this same model is being used around the world. And we look at places like South Africa, where hunting was no big deal back in the 1950s and 60s. That was just livestock country. If you had game on your ranch, you shot them because they're competing with your sheep. Now, the hunting business there is huge, and the ownership and the management of wildlife in these wild lands is amazing. They went from 1 million head of game in the 50s to over 25 million now, just in the country of South Africa alone. And so that is only due to hunting and hunting economics. It's not due to anything else. Economics of hunting being applied around the world is making a really big difference. There's new examples. We got the addax in Texas, the one that I raise. We've got between 5 and 10,000, depending on who's counting. They're extinct in Africa, completely extinct. There's a funny wild goat in Central Asia that's was nearly extinct. It's called the markhor. Most people who are ringing the bell for animal rights and trying to stop hunting wouldn't know what a markhor was. They would know the difference between a markhor and a mule, to be honest with you. The markhor has doubled in population in some of those countries just in the last few years, just because of a hunting program that's been put in. So we have a wonderful track record of success with this model of hunting as a conservation tool.
It's hard to argue with him on the success.
I think they should understand that the population of elephants in Namibia is at an all-time high. They should understand the population of lions in Zimbabwe is increasing. The population of elephants in Zimbabwe is at an all-time high. They're actually overrun. Botswana is overrun with elephants, and we need to manage animals. Part of managing animals is hunting.
So, yeah, and right in the middle of this tension between hunters, ranchers, farmers, and encroaching civilization are people like Craig Miller of the Big Life Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, you see Craig Miller in our other podcasts, and he actually shows up in a couple of our episodes on the television show, The Good Road. He is in charge of security for the Big Life Foundation, and he's part of a team that tries to mitigate human-animal conflict. So the role of Big Life in these areas is to do what?
So under my department, which is the security, is to provide wildlife security and prevent poaching from happening and mitigate human-wildlife conflict. But, you know, the whole ethos behind Big Life is to drive meaningful benefits for the local people through wildlife. You know, if wildlife's going to have a future here, then obviously it has to mean economic returns in the long run.
So what animals are you guys protecting?
Pretty much everything within there. You obviously pay more attention to what we call high-value species, which are elephant, lion, leopard, etc. Stuff where they're trophies, essentially, that are then entered into the legal wildlife trade. In Kenya, it's illegal to kill any of those. So
even the traditional tribes like the Maasai and people like that are still prohibited from killing to eat?
Yeah, it depends on the certain situation. You get guys who come in from Tanzania with, fully armed, try and get as many elephants as they can. We've had a case where 6 elephants were shot in one thing.
Wow.
But then you get a farmer whose farm's been squashed by elephant, and he throws a spear to scare them and the elephant dies. You wouldn't charge him under poaching. So,
I mean, it's a messy business. It's a messy business, but why do you do it?
Well, I mean, I've always loved wildlife. Growing up, first job I wanted to be was a game ranger, but very different to what I thought a game ranger was, obviously, in those early days.
So the fact is that when these exotic animals and humans interact, it oftentimes turns out poorly for both.
Totally. I mean, we saw that with Tim, the largest elephant. He tramps into a field of watermelons, and they throw a spear at him, and next thing you know, you've injured the world's largest elephant. Philanthropology is brought to you by First Republic. Since 1985, First Republic has had just one goal: deliver extraordinary service that always goes beyond client expectations.
Because no two clients are alike, First Republic designs financial solutions for individuals and businesses that are customized to help meet your needs and goals.
Reach out today and you'll be connected with a dedicated banker who will be your primary point of contact throughout your relationship with the bank. You can call or email your banker at any time for advice or to get help with whatever arises.
Because they understand your total financial picture, your banker can recommend the services and products that are best suited to you or your business.
And they're committed to staying objective, so it's always about what makes sense for you at every stage and not about what's most profitable.
If you're ready to discover how a personalized approach to banking can make a meaningful difference in your personal and business outcomes, visit firstrepublic.com to learn more.
Member FDIC. Let's address the ethics then of killing these animals, or really any animal. I think very few people in the world would advocate for killing kittens.
Yeah, you don't F with cats.
Rule number 0. But I mean, and there's other things. What would you kill? What would you kill to eat?
I mean, I wouldn't kill a dog and eat it, but there are cultures around the world that do.
Right.
So.
And horses, their culture. I mean, you could go to Belgium and see the same thing.
Yeah, horse meat's very popular in certain countries.
Or Sierra Leone with monkeys.
Yeah.
Well, I thought we should get some scientific basis for this ethical argument against killing animals. So I turned to Christine Webb, who's now a fellow at Harvard's Department of Human Evolutionary Biology.
So I study primate behavior with a specific focus on primate social behavior. The reason why I got into what I do, and I think this is probably not unique to me, but maybe shared amongst many in my field, for a deep love and interest or curiosity about animals. And then, along with that comes a lot of other questions related to ethics. And I think, it doesn't operate in isolation from academia. For me, it's really where it started was an interest and love and appreciation for animals.
So it's interesting that she has probably visited some of the exact same places as Philip. I mean, they came at it from different areas, but they're in the Tsavo, they're in Kenya, they're looking at the same place. And what they end up with is very different perspectives.
When I started college, I had my first experience in Africa going on safari with my parents, the first of many, actually. So I was very lucky to kind of get exposed to that around the time that I was getting interested in some of these questions and thinking about what I wanted to do career-wise. And then, I guess probably after that first trip to Africa, we went to the Masai Mara and followed the Great Migration. I knew that, this is where my heart is, really.
What I find most fascinating about her research on the similarities of humans and animals really starts to blur that difference between us as species.
One topic that I've gotten more and more interested in is empathy. And we're defining empathy here as the capacity to share and understand the thoughts and the feelings of others. And in animals, the best behavioral marker we have of empathy is known as consolation behavior. So that's essentially when, say, there's a conflict between two individuals, and the victim of that conflict, who is clearly distressed, might be approached by a third individual and offered kind of some reassuring contact. So that is a behavior maybe we can recognize in our own species, and has kind of this functional label, consolation, because it actually does serve to relieve the victim's distress. So we've looked at this in chimpanzees, and originally, I guess the thought was that it was something that only the great apes showed, but now it's been documented quite widely across the animal kingdom.
This episode of Philanthropology has been made possible by Advanced Micro Devices.
AMD. They're in our tribe of do-gooders, and we're excited to have them along on this journey of doing good in the world.
AMD is helping solve the world's toughest and most interesting challenges around climate action, quality education and good health, and well-being.
Tomorrow's breakthroughs start with the determination and inspiration of today.
Trust us, if you're going to do good, you need some smart people in your tribe.
Yeah, people smarter than you and me for sure. Yeah, I mean, looking back, it's funny, but eating the monkey is kind of disturbing because we are so similar to animals in many ways, including how we interact with each other.
Right. And again, what's more profound to me was the fact that we think of humans versus animals and animals being this homogenous group. The reality is animals have many individual characteristics just like humans. We're all humans, but just like these two, we see the world in a very different light and we act differently.
The idea being that after the discovery of empathy and consolation, these types of empathy-driven behaviors in other animals, one kind of follow-up question that hadn't been addressed is, is there variation in the degree to which different individuals express these empathetic behaviors? And so we wanted to look at that. And it turns out that there is substantial individual variation in consolation behaviors over the lifetime, and that those tendencies tend to be relatively stable, indicating that individuals, when they're young, if they're more empathic, they tend to develop into adults who are also more empathic. And that's very much consistent with the human literature on the topic of empathy, which suggests that it's kind of can be seen as a stable individual difference or a personality trait.
Well, looking back, that's kind of the disturbing part about me eating the monkey, because it turns out we are very similar to animals on the one hand, yet very different from each other as humans. It's a really interesting study, Christine. Spiritual. Philip is religious. She has a deep respect for animals, and so does Philip.
Yeah, they seem very similar, except for the fact that she has in her role an appreciation for the role of conservation in a slightly more compassionate way.
I have a colleague who has kind of coined this term, or was partly responsible for coining this term, compassionate conservation, which is all about kind of trying to understand the value of an individual organism. Because, trophy hunting is one thing, but even within the field of conservation more generally, there's a lot of culling of animal populations that takes place. And, compassionate conservation is kind of trying to blend animal welfare approaches that emphasize the individual and qualities of the individual, and the value of an individual, and appease that kind of with maybe conservation biologists who tend to focus more on species and populations. And so I think, even within those fields, there is also this conversation happening around, how do we place particular value on an individual life, and what does that mean?
So I just find it interesting that there's quite a bit of overlap here. I mean, in the understanding of the issues, and yet they have a starkly different perspective. First, let's listen to Christine discuss hunting and zoos.
I think a lot of the kind of arguments that these pro-trophy hunters make, they resonate with some of the arguments that zoos make about, the greater good, and where a lot of the money that these, zoos or that trophy hunting is generating, where that's going. And, at the same time, then you have this opposing view, or maybe this tension with the idea of zoos or trophy hunters as, perpetuating this kind of notion of what animals are for and our relationship to animals and how they are used. And I absolutely put way more value on that. So if you want my opinion on trophy hunting, I think it's wrong. If you want my opinion on zoos, I think they are changing faster than I thought. So I feel very much, kind of sympathetic to your view that these are, there always can be a case made for something. But when the morality kind of goes on to the other side, that's where that's where kind of the tipping point will be for me.
Okay, and now here's a little bit about Philip describing his first hunt.
There's just a range of emotions, and so you're planning, you're hunting, you're tracking, and then you get the chance to actually get on that animal and take that shot that I'm describing for you as being something that's important, to be prepared to make a quality shot, to do it in a proper manner, and then there it is. There you've got the animal. And you get to go over to it and take a look at it and see how amazing, how wonderfully created it is. And then you have your moment with it and pay your respects. And then, of course, if you're in Africa, then the people are ready for some meat. So the joy of getting to share that kill, if you will, with those people is just quite an experience, and one that I wish that more people could get the chance to be a part of.
All right, so Craig, what do you think? What would Jesus do?
I think Jesus would not kill large game.
Really?
I don't know.
I mean, it because we both come from missionary families and things like that.
Yeah.
It's what's the argument on the religious side?
This idea that religiously we have dominion over the animals is
right.
One of those things that gets pulled out and drawn out. But you know what? There were people who made arguments for slavery because of excerpting things from the Bible.
Right. Well, I mean, again, you'll hear in this next thing how Philip feels about it from a religious perspective, and it's not a surprise.
For me, I revere God's creation. As a Christian, I believe that God created all these animals. They didn't. A slug didn't crawl up out of the ocean and pop turned into a lion. Sorry, didn't happen. God created that lion, and when I looked at that lion and felt of that lion, when I got the chance to look at it and feel of it, I just knew it was perfectly made, and it was made by God. And people say, well, how can you hunt these animals if God made them? Well, God gave us the ability and the responsibility to rule over all of the animals. In other words, to manage them and to be when we have the right to use them. So for me as a believer, I don't believe that there's anything wrong about hunting. Again, there's probably people that do things wrong as they're hunting, but hunting in general, there's nothing wrong with it from a religious standpoint.
Well, Earl, like in the podcast today, that we've said it before, it's a messy business.
It's a messy business, and again, it's what surprises me is that We're all people, we're looking at the same thing, and yet we see it very differently. That's not different than the binary divisions that we have in the world today. We look at the same events and we see it very differently. Interesting study. So check out our website. It's going to be philanthropology.tv, and there you're going to find behind the scenes, extended interviews, and some just funny stuff that Craig and I tend to get into. All right, in the next episode of Philanthropology, we're going to get into education.
That sounds
Bueller.
boring.
Bueller.
No, honestly, it's one of the coolest episodes in a lot of ways because we talk with Patrick Moynihan, who is this Catholic missionary who has all these controversial ideas and things, and then Dr. Susan Kessler at a Title I school in Nashville.
Who doesn't mind standing up to Congress.
There's a hilarious bit at the beginning of the podcast that you have to listen for. You're going to laugh your butt off.
Awesome. Can't wait. The Philanthropology Podcast is recorded at In Your Ear Studios in Richmond, Virginia, with direction from producer Carlos Chafin, engineering help from Andrea Steffel, soon to be Bukite.
Earl and I also get creative direction from Andy Dunsing, the Good Road Public Television Show. The theme music for Philanthropology was created by Jordan Martin of the band Door Mountain and can be found on iTunes.
We also want to thank all of our do-gooders who gave us their time, support, and gray matter.
And finally, we want to thank our original investors in all of this, our wives and kids. Specifically our wives who put up with us, Pam Bridges and Erica Martin.
And to all the girls I've loved before. I just want to point out one section of this website, Craig, if you take a look at it.
Yeah.
Did you know you can go kangaroo hunting?
I mean, the idea of that, I'm just sorry.
You got a picture of
Kangaroo hunting.
a husband and his wife sitting next to a kangaroo that they just killed. Here's what they say about it. Kangaroos can be hunted legally year-round in Texas. Believe it or not, it's illegal to recreationally hunt kangaroos in Australia.
Like that's a point of pride.
Right? Come on down to West Texas. Yeah, and look at some of the other things. If you look a little bit further down, I mean, it's in this case $7,000. You get field dressing, 100% opportunity guarantee, meaning that you'll get your shot.
Firearm and ammunition provided.
If needed. That's right. And you can land your private jet on their 5,800-foot paved and laid runway. I mean, who are these people? It's an exclusive. It's all-inclusive beveraging, a hunting guide. You know, you get some other stuff. Look at the interesting kangaroo hunting information. We've had hunters fly all the way from Australia to hunt kangaroo at our ranch due to it being illegal elsewhere. Female kangaroos have 3 vaginas. Why would you kill that?
A herd of kangaroos is called a mob. Well, maybe that mob should pack heat and fire back.
Oh my gosh. And in Australia, kangaroos outnumber humans 2-1, but I don't know what that means. You know, apparently they're not killing enough kangaroos. Oh, brother.
It's super relevant right now with all the fires and stuff, and you see these animals like escaping the fires in Australia. And
yeah.
But here in West Texas, they shoot them.
We don't stop in West Texas.